BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Good morning. Today, the piglets being encouraged to get on better with their fellow inmates.
Look at these two. They almost look like they're kissing, these two piglets.
These very subtle forms of interaction actually are probably really important in maintaining social stability.
And how Hilda, a newborn calf, has been bred to help tackle climate change. First, though, to the efforts being made to turn the tide of salt marsh decline. Conservationists are working on the River Dart to protect what's a valuable habitat. 13 organisations, including the Environment Agency, are trying to preserve 10 acres of the marsh in Devon, just downstream from Totnes. BBC South reporter Emma Rominski went to see how the project is getting on.
It's hard to imagine this part of the River Dart without salt marsh, but there are already places where it's disappeared. The organisations working together to try and restore and protect the marsh say they're too important to lose. Emma McGee works for the Environment Agency as the South Devon Catchment Coordinator.
Salt marshes are a really vital habitat for people and wildlife. So they sequester carbon, they help trap the sediment and pollutants in the water and lock it away, and they protect our shorelines from erosion. As well as that, they're a really important habitat for loads of really important plants and species like birds and fish that use our estuaries to feed, to hunt and to breed.
Downstream from Totnes, teams are working at low tide on the mud. Bundles of coppiced wood from the riverbanks are repurposed, tied in bundles and staked in place across gullies, holding back the sediment to allow the salt marsh to thrive. Jen Fox has been working on the project for Park Life.
So the mud has been very sticky. So what we've been using is scaffold boards, so that gives us some purchase on the ground, and also it means that we're doing less damage to the marsh, so we're not actually walking in the mud, because when we were walking in the mud it's like walking through tar.
The Environment Agency estimates that 85% of England's salt marshes have been lost due to development and changing land use, and are more at risk because of rising sea levels and climate change. Nigel Mortimer knows all about the ecology of the area. He works as the Estuaries Officer for the South Devon National Landscape Estuaries Partnership.
The salt marsh plants actually are a habitat, they're a community that support other animals, and they're also a place between the foreshore proper that's dominated by the seaweeds and then the land behind. So they occupy this tiny little niche right at the top, not flooded by every tide, but just enough salt to keep other plants at bay.
The project has cost £200,000 to restore 10 acres. Dart Harbour and Navigation Authority is hopeful the scheme can expand further in future. Paul Britton is the harbour master.
So this area here is the one area on the Dart that used to have salt marsh but now doesn't. It was there up until the 20s and 30s. There's wartime footage from the RAF, but now it's mudflat. So the next phase of this project is going to be to have a look at whether there's a possibility of restoring some of that, bringing back some of the fantastic salt marsh habitat into that environment.
It's hoped the learning that they've gathered from this project will help salt marsh restoration around the country.
Emma Rominski meeting those working to restore Devon's salt marsh. Do pigs have social skills? How do you reduce fighting between piglets? Can you predict tail biting using remote cameras? Now, these are some of the questions being answered by scientists at the Pig Research Unit run by Scotland's Rural College just outside Edinburgh. Experts in animal behaviour and welfare are conducting experiments at the unit aimed at finding practical solutions to some of the biggest challenges faced by the pig industry. For BBC Radio 4's On Your Farm programme, Kaz Graham visited to hear more.
We're in the finisher shed, so these are some of the older pigs on the farm. You'll notice that we've got quite a lot of straw on the floor here. This is a concrete and straw system. And these pigs also, you'll notice, have got curly tails because unusually on this unit we don't tail dock our pigs.
They're all coming to say hello, aren't they? Hello. We've got about 10 of them who are all right up at the edge of the pen. I may be in a barn full of pigs here, but this is not your average pig farm. I'm with Rick Deeth, who is a professor of animal behaviour and welfare here. These pigs are kind of the classic image of a pig, aren't they? They are pink, they're about, 2 foot tall. They're really curious, aren't they?
You can see them doing what pigs love to do all day long if you'll let them, which is they're rooting, exploring, sniffing. You can see them making that sort of digging movement in the straw.
Now this is the farm part of the whole unit here, but you also have an experimental unit here. I mean, some people might feel a bit uncomfortable with the idea of experimentation. Tell me what you do. What are you looking for here?
So the core skill of most of the scientists that work at this unit is animal behaviour and animal welfare. So essentially we investigate how changes in management or changes in housing can improve the welfare of pigs. So a lot of what we do is commissioned by government or by industry in order to address the public's concern over issues like farrowing crates or issues like tail docking or aggression.
Well, Professor Simon Turner is with us as well. I mean, you're looking at social competence in pigs. Do pigs have social competence?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to find out with this work. What researchers have typically done in the past is to look at one behaviour in isolation. So they might look at fighting behaviour, or they might look at playing, or they might look at tail biting and things like this. We're interested in understanding whether these things all actually come together and whether it's possible to have an animal that shows the right amount of play that helps them develop, that uses aggression only when it has to and settles down quickly, shows the right kind of grooming behaviour and so on to form stable social relationships. We want to know if all of these things can be brought together into the right kind of animal that's right for modern farming.
Haven't farmers been doing that very thing for years through breeding?
Well, breeding typically focuses on economically relevant traits, the traits which have a direct benefit in the marketplace. So things like growth rate and feed efficiency and things like this. We don't tend to breed on behavioural traits. So behaviour can change positively or negatively as a result of breeding for performance traits like growth rate. So you can imagine an animal that actually grows really well but does so at the expense of everybody else. If it bullies everybody else, it pushes them out of the feeder and so on. What we want is an animal that grows well and is economically productive but also has the right kind of social behaviour that benefits its welfare and benefits the welfare of everybody else in the pen.
And how are you going to achieve that?
So we're putting the animals into a range of different social situations, introducing them to unfamiliar animals, looking at their behaviour in the home pen, seeing how they respond when they're isolated and things like this, and looking to see whether these things their response to those different situations is correlated. And if it is, whether we're working with a breeding company to see whether there's a genetic basis to that variation in how the animals navigate these different social situations.
Look at these two. They almost look like they're kissing, these two piglets. They're having a really good wash of each other's muzzles.
So we see quite a lot of our gentle nosing behaviour, which is something that's been very poorly studied so far. If you think about humans, we define our social behaviour mostly by positive interactions. Most of the interactions we do with other humans are positive. And yet when it comes to animals, we tend to focus on the negative because they're very obvious, whereas these very subtle forms of interaction actually are probably really important in maintaining social stability.
Well, having reared several pigs on our farm, I'm very keen to know more, and you can hear On Your Farm on Sunday at 6:30 a.m. and also on BBC Sounds. As well as selecting animals for behavioural traits, scientists at Scotland's Rural College are also breeding animals to help combat climate change. Their first dairy calf has been born, bred using IVF and genetically selected to reduce methane emissions. Methane gas is produced by cows burping and farting and is a more damaging greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but has a shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. Last month, a report by the Lord's Environment and Climate Change Committee revealed 49% of methane emissions in the UK comes from farming and mainly from livestock, and urged the government to support farmers to use both traditional and high-tech solutions. Now, the new calf, named Hilda, is part of the Dumfries-based Langhill herd, which has been a source of data for the UK dairy industry for more than half a century. Professor Mike Coffey from SRUC told me the most efficient cows produce the least methane.
Dairy farmers have been breeding for improved productivity, improved feed efficiency and health and welfare for 40 or 50 years now. And of course, as a result of that selection policy, they have reduced the methane emissions per unit of milk produced by around about 1% per year. But of course, what we're interested in doing is accelerating that so that dairy farmers can sort of meet their obligations with a contribution to the net zero story for the UK. And we've been able to take a very high merit cow with good environmental credentials, flush eggs out of her, fertilise those eggs in the test tube with sexed semen from a bull who's been genomically tested for lower methane emissions, and create a calf that has now had selection for all the other traits as we normally do, but also now directly and specifically for methane emissions.
You have to select cows that are already producing less methane. How do you measure, which cows fit that bill? It sounds a bit messy.
Well, it's you do it by proxy, effectively. So we know that cows that live longer produce less methane per kilogram of milk in their lifetime. We know that calves that survive produce less methane, obviously, because they have a carbon cost, but they have no production if they're born dead. And there's all sorts of ways of predicting what the methane emissions of cows under various scenarios would be. And then we calculate what it would be if they were genetically improved for lower methane, and we can calculate what the expected reductions are.
There are those that would say we need to be reducing our greenhouse gases emissions now, not years down the line. And the fastest way, many would suggest, is just to reduce the number of cows and consume less dairy and meat.
Yeah, that's one part of the equation, and dairy farmers have been reducing methane emissions from dairy cows over about the last 40 years. And what we're looking to do now is to accelerate the reduction in methane emissions by accelerating what is a fairly natural process that we've been doing for a long time, but we're going to just do it quicker.
So how long will it be until you could have a whole herd like this?
I'm guessing it would be maybe 5 years or so. And then obviously those animals have to be mated and so on. The kind of analogy to think about here is that at the moment we're transitioning from petrol cars to electric cars. And that's going to take quite some years because we've got lots of petrol cars and some of them are new, and we've got to wait for them to go out of the system, and then over time they get replaced by electric cars. And probably that's going to take, 30 years or so? And the cows will be the same. You wouldn't want to just get rid of a cow that's perfectly healthy and producing lots of milk. You have to wait and replace her with a better one that produces less methane. And slowly over time, all of the cows that we breed will be lower methane, higher producing cows.
Well, a bit like electric cars, we think of cost. So will there be a cost for farmers?
Yes, inevitably. And that's a really good point to make. At the moment, we know that the government will at some point or another introduce some form of carbon tax. We don't know what it will look like and how it will be deployed. And breeding is a very long-term process, so we have to give farmers the tools to enable them to respond to the signals in good time. It's going to be some 5 to 15 years or so before the entire national herd could be replaced, and it will come at a significant cost. But if we don't do it, we'll end up with the consequences, which is, as we've seen, global warming.
Mike Coffey there from Scotland's Rural College. That's all for today. I'm Helen Mark. The producer is Beatrice Fenton. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.